good to go.
Sweet. Okay, so we are going to go over chapter 2 today. And I'm going to turn some of these lights off so we can see this board a little bit better. Okay, so chapter 2 is very specific to a music classroom. But I'm going to give you lots of other things that you can take with you into your general education classroom that are completely applicable for you as a general classroom teacher.
Your PowerPoints are all on Blackboard, correct?
Correct. All of my PowerPoints are always on Blackboard for you to reference.
And it's already up there, correct?
Correct. Okay. So within the context of a lesson, you have a couple of different things that you're working towards. You're always working towards long-term and short-term goals. However, they're two completely different things. Long-term goals are goals that you hope to reach over the course of a long period of time, such as a unit of study, at the end of a semester, or at the end of a year. All right? These goals are typically found on curriculum maps. What's a curriculum map? Does anybody know? Sarah?
Like a big kind of list or, chart table, however you want to do it, of curriculum that you have to cover and your schedule, basically.
Okay, so it's a schedule of the things that you're going to teach that semester or year or
Yeah.
that unit. Okay? Do we have a curriculum map in here?
No. Yes.
We do?
Probably, yeah, our syllabus thing.
Or a syllabus? What do you mean syllabus thing?
The pink sheet.
The pink sheet.
Like the schedule.
The course schedule. Okay. So that tells you exactly what I'm going to be doing every week. Does it say that I'm going to be teaching tas and tees for rhythm this day? No, those are short-term goals. My long-term goals are rhythmic notation. That's a long-term goal for this class. You're able to notate and speak in a rhythm. Long-term goal. So the following verbs are really useful when writing long-term goals, and these are sort of music classroom specific. So things like develop or foster, appreciate, understand, or enjoy. Okay? Those are all very specific to a music classroom or some kind of humanities classroom. If we were in a math classroom, what kind of verbs do you think would be on a curriculum map for a long-term goal for a math classroom?
Like addition, subtraction.
Okay, addition, and we wouldn't call that addition, subtraction, we would call that C word, starts with the C. Calculate. So I would calculate, that would be a long-term goal, or a verb that I could use to write my long-term goals. What about analyze, evaluate, calculate? Those would be very math specific.
And then the little one, like addition and subtraction, those would be short-term?
That would be, well, they wouldn't have to be short-term goals because I think addition is a long-term goal depending upon the grade level that you teach.
Okay.
So if I was teaching kindergarten, I would probably not get into subtract until much later in the semester. So my first semester or first month or first unit of study, it might be for math, would be probably identifying numbers, and then I would go to adding numbers, and then I would go to subtracting numbers. So those would be long-term goals, but the overarching goal would be addition. So, and remember that you can have different levels of these, and they all work together. Because in third grade, addition is not a long-term goal, multiplication is. But you still have to know how to add to do that. So we're talking about long-term goals. Thumbs up if I can move on from long-term goals. Okay, keep in mind that this PowerPoint is on Blackboard for your reference. Short-term goals. These are the things that you use to achieve long-term goals. They're the details of the big picture. And I have something in bold here. It says, these are useful for developing specific content. Why do you think specific is in bold print?
They're short and concise.
Well, they are short and concise.
It's like what you use to plan your individual lessons.
So it's what I use to plan individual lessons. They have to be what?
Specific.
Yes, very good. But why else do they have to be specific?
Because if they're not specific enough, then they can't work with the building blocks for the next
Okay, so we might not be able to move on if I have too broad of a goal. Yes. So think about that. Broad goals, they're not really specific. I'm not going to be able to analyze and write a really great lesson if I can't narrow down the scope of that lesson to something that's finite and very specific. So short-term goals should be found on your individual lesson plans, and those are typically listed as objectives. And here's the deal. Short-term goals must be substantiated or coupled with some kind of standard. So that can be Common Core standard, that could be Kentucky Academic Standard, that could be a National Music Standard. Any one of those would be fine, and they would justify, substantiate, validate, whatever adjective you want to use or verb, that you teaching that specific goal. So I know that I have to teach addition in kindergarten, right? Okay, so what I would have to do is that, has anybody ever been in a classroom in Kentucky and you walk in and they have something on the board? What are those? You remember what they are, Sarah? I can statements, yeah, Cassidy. So short-term goals or objectives are like I can statements. I can blank. And they state what I can do as a student in that classroom. So, but they're also substantiated with Kentucky Core Academic Standards. So I can, what was my I can statement for Friday's lesson? I can identify what?
No.
Shapes. Yeah, sure. I can identify circle, triangle, rectangle, and square. Yes? That was my I can statement. And what I did was, is I went through and I looked and said, oh, okay, geometry is a kindergarten standard. Underneath that, it says identify specific shapes, and it gave a list of shapes, and so that standard substantiates what I taught in that classroom that day. So it's not just arbitrary that I decided to do geometry. I have a guideline that I have to meet, and those are what standards are. Okay. Questions about short-term or long-term goals? So one of the questions on your assignment will be to describe short-term and long-term goals. So make sure you are able to do that. If you have any questions, you can email me or you can ask them right now. It's fairly straightforward. Okay, the next thing that we're going to talk about, we're going to bounce back and forth between music classroom and non-music classroom because one of my goals for this class is to give you a broad-based knowledge of music content, but I know that you're not going to be music teachers. Please don't take my job. I also want to teach you about good teaching and how to design lessons and all of that other wonderful things. All of those wonderful things. There we go. Can't talk today. I'm having some problems speaking. All right, so musical concepts are a collection of experiences or ideas that are grouped together based on some common properties. What do we call them in here? They're not called musical concepts. We call them what? And they're on the pink sheet or the course schedule.
Lessons?
Not lessons. I said blank of music / rhythm. Blank of music / harmony. Not discussion.
Ooh, right.
Elements, yeah, Shannon. So they are musical concepts are grouped based upon the fundamentals of music. You can also substitute the word elements of music in there if you need to. Right. And I have a wonderful acronym here called SMERFG. All right, and you can take off that G for this class. We're not going to use the G. And I'll explain why here in a second. So SMERFG. Any idea what the S stands for? We get lots of blank stares.
Singing.
Not sing. That's very specific. What? Not steady. Think music, broad, overarching elements. We've already done rhythm in here, right? Sound, yeah! Yeah, sound. So, you win the prize today.
Woo!
Yeah.
I just never guessed right.
Well, you did today.
Woo!
So, okay, so what do you think sound encapsulates? Okay, and okay, that's very general. Now let's get slightly more specific. So, what's the difference between noise and music?
The way that you look at it.
No?
There's patterns.
Sort of. There's not a pattern, it doesn't have to be. Have you seen that,
For rules.
okay, so we're getting a little bit
Set
closer.
of standards, regulations.
Not standards, not regulations, it has to be what?
Notated.
Not notated, oh no.
Organized.
Organized, yes. Yes, music has to be organized. So that's the difference between sound and noise, is that there's some kind of organizational framework there. And I'll give you a prime example. John Cage was this experimental composer. Okay, you know what I'm talking about? And he wrote a piece called 4 minutes and 33 seconds. And he brought out a piano bench into a concert hall full of people, sat it down at the piano, and then sat there in the bench for 4 minutes and 33 seconds, and then walked off the stage. What was his organizational framework?
Rest.
What?
Nothing.
His organizational framework was actually the title of his piece, right? Which is what?
4 minutes, 30 seconds.
4 minutes and 33 seconds, yeah? So his organizational framework was time.
Would it be like rest the whole entire time?
No, the music, and remember I said this is experimental, but it's still considered music because it has some kind of organizational framework, was the sound and noises that occurred in the concert hall during that time frame.
That's weird.
There's some kind of organization to it, and that's the difference between sound and noise. Noise can be music if there's an organizational tool. Typically we don't think of music like that, but it can be. And I digress. So sound, what else is encompassed in that S acronym, or that S portion of that acronym? So how individual instruments sound, or singing voices sound, right? What do we call that? Tone, tone color or timbre. T-I-M-B-R-E, timbre, not timber, okay? Timbre. And that's how individual instruments sound. Also within the context of this are different types of instrument families. So I have strings, brass, woodwinds, percussion, and I can group instruments based upon that. I also have different voice types, soprano, alto, tenor, and bass. And there's more, there's like coloratura soprano, there's a countertenor, there's several different other categories that you can be placed into. But just keep in mind that that is all encompassed underneath that S part of the acronym. So let's go to H. What do you think it is?
Harmony.
Harmony! Bingo. What's harmony? Okay, so it has to have at least two things that are playing or sounding at the same time. Right? Also within this part of the acronym, or this element of music, is texture. How those different sounds and how those different harmonies work together. So one of the textures that your book talks about is monophonic, which means what? One texture, right? Only one line of music. Okay? So that's actually technically not harmony, right? Because it's only one thing. And harmony has to have at least two different sounding pitches together.
Wait, what did you say texture was?
How the different lines of music work together. How many different layers of music are there? Polyphony, or polyphonic, means that there's more than one line, right? And they're working together in some manner. Homophonic texture means the same, right? So they're stacked chords like a hymn. Bum, 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 ba, da, da. And you would have all four voices singing in that rhythm. Okay. Also within this element is the notion of tonality, like major versus minor. So, major key, whatever it is. There we go. Minor key, okay, so the way they sound, and we'll talk about that later on this semester. What about ME? melody. And within this you have different pitches, you have highs and lows, you have melodic contour. There's a whole other slew of things that you can go in melody. You can have tonal relationships. What about our rhythm? Yeah, there you go. And we've talked a lot about that so far this semester. And we'll talk about all of these as the semester goes on. So the one that we're focused on, I can't even talk. Specifically this week is rhythm, and then you have micro teaching to do next week to show me that you know what you're talking about with rhythm. Okay? What about F?
Have we been given the groups for micro teaching?
Not yet. You'll have those today. What about the F? We've talked about sound, we've talked about harmony, we've talked about melody, we've talked about rhythm. What haven't we talked about? Fun? F does stand for fun, but no. Form.
There you go.
Okay, Natalie. Good. All right, yes, it's form. And what do I mean by form?
Musical form.
Good. Yes. Brava. You get an A. Just don't even come back. Okay. Now,
Form.
what kind of form do you mean? Musical form. You are correct. What do you mean? Be more specific.
Like techniques.
Not techniques.
Organization.
Organization of musical sounds. That's not harmony. It's not texture. But it's saying, let's see.
How you're doing, like how you're carrying it out.
Yes.
Is that the,
For example, we wish you a Merry Christmas, we wish you a Merry Christmas, we wish you a Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year. That's the A part. That's one section. Here's the B part. Good tidings to you. And then we go back to what? A. We wish you a Merry Christmas, we wish you a Merry Christmas, we wish you a Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year. Big finish, jazz hands. Okay? So the form of that song is ABA. You can have binary and ternary form. Binary means it's A, B, yeah? Ternary form means it has three different parts, so A, B, A. Okay? And we'll talk about that later on the semester. The G actually stands for growth, which means how music's developed over time. How that binary form has changed over the last, 1,000 years.
What was the other one besides binary?
What is it?
Binary and...
Ternary, Ternary, ternary form, which means three parts.
and binaries too.
You got it.
What about G? I'm sorry.
G is growth. We're not going to worry about that in here. It's how those different things have developed, how sound is developed, how harmony is developed, how melody is developed over the course of, however long music's been in play, which is pretty much since we've been on this planet. So all musical concepts are contained within this acronym. So things like dynamics that your book talks about, that's not an element of music. Dynamics are very specific. They are how loud or how soft music is. Okay? So don't get confused. Moving on, thumbs up. Yeah? Okay, so let's go bounce back to general ed classroom here. So let's talk a little bit about the objectives that are on your lesson plans. First of all, it doesn't matter if they're music or in your own classroom. They must be observable behaviors. Here's the deal. They have to be observable. I can't even talk today. Observable behaviors because you have to be able to assess them. Okay? You have to be able to assess them. Yes?
How would you be able to assess someone's enjoyment?
That's a long-term goal.
Okay. Gotcha.
It's not specific.
Okay.
And I think enjoyment, you could do exposure, okay?
Okay.
So, and you can teach appreciation for a musical type if you really wanted to.
Okay.
So, and the way to do that is how?
Right about it?
Not really, but have them experience that from many different perspectives,
Okay.
okay? So I might not like hard rap, that's not my thing, but I can appreciate it because I know that it is a valid musical experience in somebody else's culture,
Okay.
okay? And if I look at it from that perspective, it kind of changes the way I think and view about it. Okay, so I might not totally enjoy it, but it's probably a lot better off than what I was at the beginning of the class. Also, as a side note, what's that word? Assess. Make sure you're writing that word, because this is what I get all the time. Okay? Make sense?
Is that even a word?
Yes, asses, yes. Lots of donkeys together, okay? Plural. So please make sure that you're writing assess and not asses, okay? It is really funny, and it's sad because I get that a lot. So, proofread your work. What? No, this is the one we used on Friday. Yeah. Okay. If these behaviors are observable, students can be assessed. We've got that. Your objectives are found on your lesson plan at the very beginning. It's one of the first things that you put on there. And they need to be short, concise, to the point, and they need to outline that specific goal that you are working on in that lesson.
So objectives are short-term?
Yes, they have to be,
Okay.
because you have to assess them at the end of the lesson. So, and I write them like students will blank or students will be able to blank. In Kentucky, they write them I can blank. In West Virginia, it is students will blank. It just depends on where you are and where you go. Yes.
So objectives can't carry over, like you can't be like a two, like,
Of course you can.
okay.
Of course.
So you don't have to do an assessment at the end of every single lesson?
You will. I hope you do.
Okay,
And we'll talk about that here in a second when I get to assessment.
okay,
Okay? And there's 3 different types of assessment,
okay.
and 2 of them work together. All 3 work together, really. And we'll talk about the flow and all that other good stuff. So, moving on. Okay, we good? Thumbs up? All right. So, we're going to go skip down a lot to the body of your lesson plan, your procedure section of your lesson. Okay, it has 3 different parts: the preliminary experience or introduction, the body, and the closure. Okay? The body is the one that we typically think of when we're writing lesson plans. And that's how am I going to introduce this new content? Okay? When you write lesson plans, that's typically what we focus on. So it's the largest chunk of your lesson plan is that body part of the procedure section. Okay? Before we start with new content, you must have some kind of preliminary experience, which means that you are activating your students' prior knowledge in some capacity. If that's a review, that's fantastic. If that is an activity that allows them to have a point of reference later on in the lesson, that's fantastic. It's bridging what they already know to what they need to know in the lesson. Remember how we talked about that, how students learn? And we have to connect those different streams to that river. If you didn't have this part, guess what's going to happen? You're just going to throw rocks into that river, right? Okay? So, think about what we did on Friday. One of my goals was steady beat. Another goal was locomotor and non-locomotor movement. And another goal was identifying shapes. What was the very first thing that we did as a class? We were sitting in a circle, and I started off instantly with what? Steady beat, right. And that was just through simultaneous imitation. I didn't ask you to echo me, you just did it with me. Okay? That activated your prior knowledge. You might not think it has, but for kindergartners that totally would be valid. So we can move on to saying that poem rhythmically and talking about the different shape identifications and all that other good stuff. Thumbs up? Okay, I don't have the body on the PowerPoint. That's where you introduce the new content. That's the common sense part of this lesson. Okay, so let's move on past the body to the closure. So we've had a preliminary experience. I've activated your prior knowledge. I've taught you a new concept. Now my job as a teacher is to make sure that you bring this lesson to a close in some fashion. Okay? This could be a segue, like Liz was talking about earlier, into another lesson about the same concept. That's totally fine too. Or we could just finish this lesson off. But I don't want to leave my students hanging, ever. Okay? Unless it's like one of those, like, I'm reading a book to them, and it's a really good part, and I don't want to go on because I want them to come back to circle time and read some more. Okay? So, students should feel that the lesson is finished, and this should incorporate some aspect of the lesson in the closure. Also, typically, this is where I assess my students, not the other word. Okay? So, think back to the lesson that we did on Friday. What was the closure for my lesson? What did we do at the very end of that lesson?
We made the shapes with our bodies.
You made the shapes with your bodies. How is that assessing what I did the entire lesson? Liz?
We're going over shapes, and if you can't then make the shape, you know that we didn't learn the
Right.
shapes we should make.
So it's an observable behavior. This was a performance-based formative assessment, and we'll talk about different assessment types here in a second. It was a performance-based formative assessment in pairs. Why do you think it was in pairs? Somebody I haven't heard from today, like back row. Why do you think it was in pairs, Aaron?
So that you can, it's easier to like check off who's learned it if you're all in a group doing it together.
Okay, so it's easier for me as a teacher to facilitate that assessment. I would agree. That's not the main reason why I want to put people in pairs, though. Any other ideas?
Could they learn from each other?
So they could self-assess, okay?
Yeah.
So it might be the first lesson that I'm doing, dealing with shapes, and I don't want to have that pressure of like, oh my gosh, I don't know what the shape is.
Like singling out.
So I put them in pairs so that they can talk to each other, collaborate, and it's called self-assessing. So they can like check and make sure that they're able to do it. And then if they're not able to do it, they have somebody up here there that they can ask or assist somebody else, okay? Because like I said before, students learn best from other students and not from the teacher. It is researched and that is a proven thing. Thumbs up for closure. Can we move on? Okay, good. Here we go. Okay, I'm going to relabel this short/long-term musical concepts. This slide I'm going to relabel. Because in your textbook on page 23, does anybody have their textbook with them? Thanks, Natalie. I think it might depend on the edition that you have. If you have the 9th edition, which is with the beige cover, which is not the best cover at all, you have, it says at the top, some long-term goals for various grade levels. Okay? And I have them listed as short-term musical concepts. Why do you think that would have both labels on it?
They're really specific to be long-term goals.
They are fairly specific to be long-term goals. However, here's the deal. In music, it's a little bit different. Okay? Because one of the goals for kindergarten is sing short songs in tune with good breathing habits and tone quality. Here's the deal. I am a trained singer. I'm not the best singer, but I am a trained singer, and I'm still working on that. Okay? So I can make that a short-term goal if I want to focus on that one thing in my kindergarten lesson plan for music class. I can also make that a long-term goal if I need to. All right? So one of your assignments, one of the questions on your assignments is to tell me what are some short or long-term goals for different grade levels that are developmentally appropriate if I was going to teach a song. Let me repeat that. So the question says, you're going to teach a song to your class. Tell me if you're teaching a song to kindergartners, 3rd graders, 5th graders, or whatever the assignment says, what goals found on this chart on page 23 are developmentally appropriate and pertain to singing. So let's read through these ones, all right? So goal number 1, sing short songs in tune with good breathing habits and tone quality. Does that sound like a goal that you could list to teach a song?
Mm-hmm.
Good, yes. Perform rhythms with a steady beat. I probably would not list that as a short-term goal for a lesson, because you don't want to have too many, right? So if they're singing along with me with good breathing habits and in tune, we're good. Typically they're going to be on rhythm. What about perform music expressively?
Yeah.
I can maybe you could justify that. What about respond to expressive qualities of music through movement? If I'm teaching a song. You can make an argument for that, depending on how you're going to do it. What about play simple rhythmic melodic patterns on classroom instruments? Would I list that as a goal if I'm trying to teach a song? Play simple rhythmic melodic patterns on classroom instruments. Probably not. Here's been a pitfall of students in the past, and I'm going to let you know so that you do not make the same mistake. A lot of students just copy and paste this chart into their assignment, and that's completely wrong, because a lot of these short-term or long-term goals, however you want to talk about them, are not developmentally appropriate when you're teaching a song. Why would I have you play classroom instruments when I'm trying to teach you a song? That might happen later. Okay? So please make sure that you're looking over that carefully. Also, it's a lot easier on you, yeah? Because you're not typing a bunch of stuff. You're like looking through it and like thinking about it and then writing. Speaking of which, I was very impressed with your assignments from last week. Out of all 10 sections that I have taught so far this class, as a collective whole, the 8 and 9 o'clock sections this semester have been the best writers by far. So please keep that up. It's much easier for me to grade as a teacher if you are writing well. All right? So please keep that up. Okay. So let's talk a little bit about lesson length and lesson frequency. These are two separate things. Lesson length is how long students are going to be physically in my classroom for music time, or math time, or reading time. Frequency is how often I need to review or teach a concept. So frequency of a lesson is how often I need to teach about steady beat. Because that's going to vary by grade level, right? I'm going to teach steady beat 1,000,000 times to kindergartners, but I'm probably not going to teach steady beat 1,000,000 times to Morgan, who is an adult. Maybe she needs it, I don't know. So a rough estimate for the length of lessons, K through 3, 20 to 25 minutes. That's it, move on. Do something completely different, like literally completely different. This is why I hate when I teach in public schools that they have music time is like 45 minutes long for a kindergartner. And I can do that, that's fine. But how many lessons am I really going to have that day?
2
At least 2, probably 3. All right?
of completely different concepts?
Yes.
Nothing, I mean,
Yes.
okay.
How long would you prefer the class to be then?
For kindergarten, preschool kindergarten, 20 minutes max.
Okay.
First grade, second grade, 20 to 20, 25, 30. For second grade, 25. Third grade, 30 minutes. Third through sixth, it just depends on the class really. But they would get bigger as they get older. So the increment, like the time length. Here's another thing, another good rule of thumb. Students are only able to pay attention to one thing as many minutes as they are old. Think about that. Students are only able to pay attention to things for as many minutes as they are old. Typically. Okay? So if I'm in kindergarten, I'm only able to focus for about 5 minutes on one thing or one activity. Now, I'm glad you asked that question earlier. I would have, for a kindergarten lesson that's 45 minutes long, I would probably have 2, more than likely 3 different concepts that I'm trying to teach. And I would have about 7 different ways to teach each one of those concepts so that I could switch it up as much as needed. So if I was working on steady beat, if I was working on singing a song, and if I was working on playing a rhythm, I would have 3 different activities for each one of those concepts. And herein lies the problem with having a kindergartner sit at a desk all day. Not going to happen. It's not the way they learn. okay? So if I'm teaching reading for an hour and a half, which is a typical reading block in elementary school, how many different activities am I going to have to teach one concept? What? 15. Because I have to switch it up every 5 minutes. Now here's the deal, it might not be 15, it might be 4, and I could just rotate them if I'm good. You know what I'm saying? So keep that in mind as well.
Does it matter, like, I don't know if they even do this, this is just something that we did in my classroom, which was 10 kids, so less, but go around and read, okay, so I'm reading 3 sentences, and she's reading 3 sentences, and she's reading 3 sentences, we're all reading the same story, is that's all the same concept, because they can only pay attention, you're only gonna pay attention to when they're reading.
Well, they have to pay attention to when they're reading and when you're reading too, right?
Yeah, but I guess what I'm saying is, like, you're saying switch it up, but that's not switching it, every time in there.
That's not switching
Yeah,
it.
because it's not, okay,
Right.
yeah.
And were you doing that in kindergarten now?
No, I was doing that in like 2nd grade.
Right, and so how old are you in 2nd grade? 8 or 9?
Yeah.
Yeah. So you can go for about 10 minutes, which typically is enough time to round robin read a story in 2nd grade.
Okay.
Because think about like the reading level in 2nd grade. Okay? So in 5th grade, you can round robin read for how long? Because they're like 11 or 12. See what I'm saying? So it gets better every year. The content's going to get more. And you can also switch it up. So why couldn't you say we can read this one passage, round robin read? Because really, what's the point of that? Do you know the point of round robin reading?
To practice your reading skills, your speaking out, like your public speaking skills, and comprehension.
It's not really comprehension, because a lot of times that concept is disjointed. If like Cassidy's reading, and then you're watching her read, but then you're focused on what you're reading,
Yeah.
and then you kind of like passively learn, and then Sarah gets to read. See what I'm saying? So really what I'm doing as a teacher for round robin reading is assessing fluency. The rate and speed at which you read out loud and the inflection in your voice. So that's my goal as a teacher for round robin reading, is to be able to assess you individually. That's all. So, okay, sorry.
No, I was just trying to like.
No, that's a good question. I really like it. We're going to move on. So we're talking about management framework here in a second. So at the very bottom, I have this little caveat here. So the frequency of a lesson needs to ensure continuity of learning without beating a dead horse. Okay? What does the term or the phrase beating a dead horse mean?
You already know it.
They already know it. What's the
Stop
point of
telling it to them.
What's the point of rehashing this? Okay? So continuity of learning. It means that I'm going to teach the concept enough times for them to learn it before we can move on, but I'm also not going to overteach it either. So if I'm teaching steady beat, let's leave music for a second. If I'm teaching rhythm, I can't even talk. If I'm teaching math, there we go. And I teach 1 + 1 = 2. I'm probably going to have to do that a lot more frequently in a kindergarten classroom than I am to be in a 2nd grade classroom, right? Because by then I should know that 1 + 1 = 2. However, you might want to review. So I might only teach that concept once in 2nd grade, and we can move on. So that's the continuity of learning that I'm talking about. So it's working enough times with one goal for them to learn it without over-teaching them. And this is really hard to do because you're going to have lots of different learners in your classroom. And Tiffany might not know that 1 + 1 = 2 as soon as Sarah knows that 1 + 1 = 2. So it's up to you to figure out how your classroom learns best and to juggle all of that. Yes, ma'am?
Do they still do like gifted and talented and?
They do.
They do that?
They
Sorry,
do.
I know that's off topic, I was just wondering.
No, and that's called compartmentalizing your learners. And so a lot of places that I've taught before have done that. And so think about a bell curve, and you have 2 standard deviations on either side. So in a classroom of 20, let's say, you'll have 2 people that are gifted, 2 people that are special learners, and the rest will be in the middle. So you'll have 16 in the middle, right?
Okay.
So,
And it's your job to determine who those are?
yeah.
Yeah, okay.
It's your job to figure that out, and then it's also your job to figure out how you're going to teach both ends of that spectrum and not leave anybody else behind.
Okay.
So you've got to challenge your gifted learners, you have to make sure that your special learners are keeping up, and you have to make sure that your middle, normal developing learners, if you will, are on target. Okay? Okay, so on this PowerPoint are 9 national music standards. They just revamped all of these in July. I have not read them because I have not had time because I took 5 summer classes. Yes. So for the purposes of our class, we're going to use the 9 music standards, and these are overarching. Keep in mind that within the context of each one of these standards are a bunch of different substandards that you can work on. That's all you have to know. So the ones that you need to address if you're singing is number 1, maybe number 3, and 4. Okay, so read over those, come to class on Wednesday with questions if you have them. Okay, let's talk a little bit about writing lesson plans. So lesson plans must contain a title, name, date, teacher, all that other good stuff. Hold on a second. All right, so let's go through my lesson plan right here. So it has my name, title lesson, date, and grade level. Yes? These, by the way, are on Blackboard if you'd like to look at them. I have my objectives, which I wrote in the students will blank, and they're in student-friendly language. Students will identify the following shapes. And students will demonstrate the use of steady beat, locomotor movement, and rhythmic speech. All right, so those are my 2 objectives that I have for this lesson on Friday, yes? I have substantiated those objectives with Kentucky Core Academic Standards. So not only do I have to reach those objectives that I wrote, I have to use what people think everyone should know at the end of the school year as a reason for teaching. I can't just arbitrarily say, oh, I'm going to teach geometry in kindergarten. There's a reason that I teach geometry in kindergarten, and it's driven by these standards. So I went through the Kentucky Core Academic Standards, and I looked at them, and I said, okay, here's one overarching standard, and here are the rest of them that I'm substantiating that with.
Could you just copy and paste them?
I copied and pasted it from, and we'll talk about that here in a second. So academic expectations. So these are from the Kentucky Core Academic Standards music section. Don't use that. All right? Just use a national music standard. And I would say sing or play a very repertoire of music, and we just hit like 1 or 2 standards. So rationale, this is an adult version of your objectives, in other words. This is the reason why I am teaching this lesson. This lesson is designed to reinforce kindergarten geometry and musical skills through the use of music, movement, identification, classification, and description. This is for an administrator to walk in and read that and know exactly what's happening in my classroom at all times. It's not for the students, it's not for the teacher, it's really for the administration. So let's talk about the management framework. So this is where they are physically in the classroom and how much time I'm spending on each activity. And remember how I told Sarah that I would have 4 or 5 different activities in a lesson? This is where I list those activities. So 5 minutes on the floor learning the poem, 5 minutes on the floor reviewing locomotor movement, 10 minutes playing the first version of the game, 8 minutes playing the detective game, and 2 minutes reviewing discovery of new shapes using your body. Strategies are the things that I use as a teacher to aid in student success or learning. So I have teacher modeling, I have cooperative learning in pairs, and group speaking and parts and together. So group work, collaborative work, teacher-led discussion, student-led discussion, there's a whole bunch of those out there. We already talked about the procedural section of the lesson. I have an introduction or preliminary experience. I go into the body where the most things happen. This is where I teach new concepts. And then I go to the closure where I assess. And then I list my assessment types. I said students will be informally assessed based upon the parameters set forth in the game. This is a formative assessment. There are 3 types of assessments. There is diagnostic, there is formative, and there is summative. Diagnostic is like a pre-test. I'm diagnosing how much my students know. It can also take the form of a post-test if you want to compare data. Formative assessment means I'm diagnosing the formation of the concept. So I am not diagnosing, I'm assessing the formation of the concept. So what that means is that I'm going to give, it could be informal or formal formative assessments. Okay? Typically they're informal. And this is to make sure that they are reaching the goals that I set on my lesson plan. So are they reaching the short-term goals for this one specific lesson?
What's an example?
Formative assessment that we've used in here is make shapes with your body. Because my goal for the lesson was to make sure that you could identify circle, triangle, rectangle, and square, so those are the shapes that I had you perform. If you're working on 1 plus addition, 1 plus 1 equals 2, or other simple addition, I would maybe give you a worksheet and you would do a written formative assessment. Okay?
There's performance and
There's performance-based assessments, there's written assessments, there's portfolios, there's, you know, a whole slew of different assessment types, ways to implement those assessments, but there's 3 different kinds of assessments: diagnostic, formative, and summative.
And can you say diagnostic one more time?
Diagnostic is, I'm diagnosing how much my students know. So it's basically a pretest. Okay? Formative is, am I reaching the goals that I set forth at the beginning of the lesson? That's a really good way to think about that. Summative assessments are more formal typically, and they take place at the end of a unit of study. So this would be like a midterm or final. Because summative means I am summarizing my knowledge. Okay, and then I have a material section at the bottom which lists exactly what I need for that lesson. Okay, I've got to move on because we have to assign micro-teaching partners, and I also want to go over the Kentucky Core Academic Standards. Morgan, will you please push stop for me?